Welcome back to the Marian Flaxman Network Podcast, a podcast dedicated to reintroducing personal narratives into critical public health topics. On today's episode, my conversation with Tristaun LeClaire. Tristaun is a father, a husband, and the owner of Simple Kneads Bread Company, a company that produces a gluten-free, low-allergen sourdough bread. His role as a father began his journey as a bread maker when his son was diagnosed with celiac disease and the whole family had to go gluten-free. Tristaun went to the store looking for a gluten-free bread like any parent would in this situation, and what he found disappointed him profoundly. He found sugars and starches held together with gums and fillers. Tristaun felt that he could do better. He used his background in chemistry, along with his passion and understanding of nutritious foods, and developed the sourdough recipe that his company uses today. In this episode, we discuss his long and winding journey to finding himself and to finding himself as a bread maker. We also talk about the many challenges involved in running a small business, and especially when running a small business that has to do some amount of consumer education around the value and healthfulness of your product. Finally, we talk about some critical topics in public health, like the role of nutrition in health more broadly, and the common misconceptions around carbohydrates, and why the real issue in our food system is not carbs, but refined, ultra-processed carbohydrates and sugars. Many people get rid of carbs entirely from their diet, thinking that all carbs are bad. But in fact, carbohydrates play a critical role in fueling our gut microbiome. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Tristaun LeClaire. Tristaun, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be here.
You own an amazing bread company.
Thank you.
Which I have patronized, even though I myself am a bread baker.
That's awesome.
How long have you been around?
Yeah, we founded about 10 years ago in 2014.
Wow.
And we didn't start sales till about 2015, 2016, but I started the initial journey of creating a company in 2014.
Yeah. Because I know that you were not a bread maker from the day you were born,
No.
and because I have a personal fascination with the winding path through life,
Yeah.
I would love to hear you speak about your own winding path and what you wanted to do when you grew up, where you saw yourself perhaps as a kid or a teenager, and then what you were doing when you ultimately pivoted to making nutritious, delicious, gluten-free sourdough bread.
Awesome. It's a long story, but I'll try to keep it short.
I'll buckle up.
So, yeah, I'll go back to when I was 4, when my mom, mom asks the proverbial question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she literally asked me that. And I told her, Mom, I was a pensive little kid. I said, Mom, I need some time to think about it. So
That's the right answer.
Yeah, that's right. So a few days passed, my childish mind. And I said, Mom, I know what I want to be. And she says, oh, what is it? I said, I want to be a good man.
Oh.
And honestly, that has been my pursuit from a very young age, is really the pursuit of greatness. And greatness through humility, because I think that is really the underscoring element to all greatness is self-effacing humility in leadership. So I really sought to kind of embody that in what we do at Simple Kneads, in our culture of our company, and even baked into the formula and everything that goes into the bread is really about being harmless and being helpful.
I love that. And I just want to sort of point to that and also say that every single time in my own winding journey, I have clear memories of this. Every time that I've been like, I don't know what to do next, I've always just gotten quiet and asked, how can I be of service?
Sure.
And that's always decided the next step.
Absolutely.
So I love that has kind of been your North Star, is this, how can I be good, not just for my own ego or for fun, but to serve and to give and to better the world.
The greatest blessings come from blessing others, honestly.
Yeah.
And so, from there, I grew up and became a teenager and, went through my own little rebellious times, as we all kind of struggle with. But, my motive had changed in that period of my life. I really was, I grew up fairly religious, and I really kind of turned away from that during this period, and was just seeking a good time. And I thought really that the best thing in life would be to have a business where I could, do very little and make a lot of money. And that was like really my only motive at that time. So I had kind of a big interruption in my life. I was pretty alcoholic at the time. I was, you know, living in California and Napa Valley and drinking a lot of wine, and just kind of built a dependency upon it at the time. And my last day there, I was I went out on the town and basically got hammered and was in the bars until they closed. And at that time, I drove this Pontiac Trans Am and red T-tops, WS6, and I walked out of the bar and walked into my car and decided I was going to drive home like 3 blocks. Like, walk, you idiot. And my housemate at the time was in the car with me, and this police officer watched me walk out, put his lights on, and I took off. I was like, no, I'm not doing I can't get a DUI today. And like, I should have just stopped. Like, but yeah, I like peeled out and thought I lost him, you know, really kind of a crazy scene in my life. But I pull into my lawn. I think I'm like, yeah, I'm good. And I walk to my front door, and he peels around the corner, drives on my lawn, jumps out of his car. He said, you're under arrest. I'm like, what? No. I'm like, jump in my house, close the door. And he forces his way into the house. I'm like, you can't come in here. You don't have a warrant. He's like, doesn't work that way.
I
Yeah.
probable cause.
Yeah, probably a little bit, probably. Yeah. And my housemate looks at me. She goes, Tristaun, what are you doing? And all of a sudden, I had a sober up moment, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what have I done? I just dug my own grave. And I looked at the officer. I was like, officer, I've been drinking. I'm sorry. Like, let's go outside. Like, I'm not going to resist you anymore. I've been an idiot. So he's like, okay, stand at attention in front of your car. So I'm like, okay, he's trying to stand at attention. And he's like, I got to breathalyze you, because I can smell it on your breath, and you just admitted you've been drinking. I'm like, yeah. So this is California, mind you, like very low limit. He gets the breathalyzer out. I blow. He looks at me, looks at the breathalyzer, looks at me. He goes, you blew just under the legal limit. I'm like, I did? Cool. Like, he's like, why don't you just walk home next time? It was like, he just left. No speeding ticket, no reckless endangerment, no evading arrest, no striking a police officer, none of that. He just left. He gave me mercy. And, I didn't deserve it. And I wrote this prose that said, at times, giving the undeniably guilty the gift of forgiveness is enough to change their course forever. I was so like hardened in my, mindless rebellion that I was walking down the street, and like tears were pouring out of my face, but I felt zero emotion. And I was like, what's wrong with my eyes? Like, what's wrong with me? And I felt like God was calling me. Like, why did that just happen to me? And that's where I really kind of saw a turn in my life. I left a pretty big chunk out. My father died when I was young, just after I said I wanted to be a good man.
Oh.
Actually, when I was about 5, committed suicide, and it was pretty hugely disruptive. And I think that's what kind of spun me into that kind of really rebellious time in my life. Is I got very angry at him and at me and at my siblings. And my mom remarried a couple times, but finally, when I was, I think, 18, she married this chiropractor and naturopath. He's, very science driven, and he just believes that allopathy is not necessarily the right way, and that the body is its own healer, and also, herbs are for the healing of, you. And so he's really big into diet and lifestyle and, nutritional supplementation to help support you on whatever challenge that you're fighting. And so at the age of 18, he began having a really positive influence in my life. And I love him to death. He's my dad, and the only one I have.
Yeah.
So, anyways, when we got married, my wife and I, we began doing this work for him and his patients who were like your daughter, were pan-allergic, but people were just like, I don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't have all these things. And he had like hypersensitive patients that were like, they couldn't eat the same food like same ingredient more than once every week.
Right.
It was crazy. And then like huge limitations on what they could even do because of, they'd have anaphylactic conditions, or some of them had food sensitivities, and he was just trying to help their inflammation subside a bit so they could heal.
Right.
So we kind of took on the task, my wife and I, of innovating and coming on as a nutritional like consultants under his wing to help these people that were struggling to know how they could eat healthfully with the restrictions that they were just now, realized they had. And so that's where I really began dabbling in ancient grains and grains that were outside of wheat, because wheat is such an inflammatory thing in a lot of people. So I started working with teff and amaranth and quinoa and millet and sorghum and buckwheat and all these really great ancient grains from cultures around the world that had been using these grains for their bread staples for thousands of years, and so that's where the journey really began. And then from there, I worked as his basically head chef and director of their health retreat in Idaho. And he would bring patients to us, and we would work with them to help them just change their lifestyle, their diet and lifestyle.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was so amazing. It was so rewarding.
There's so much about what you shared that I think is so important, because what I say about this podcast is that I'm trying to bring personal narratives back into public health topics, because
Yeah.
I think when topics become too big
Mm-hmm.
because they apply to everyone,
Mm-hmm.
things like nutrition,
Yeah.
things like healthcare in general, it's very easy to forget that within those topics, at every single level, there are just people.
Yeah, people.
People
Yeah.
doing things.
Yeah.
People being people and learning as they go.
Yeah.
And so I love that you shared your story in that way, because it really highlights that, here you are right now, you are the owner of a company.
Mm-hmm.
People can find your product on the shelf and they might go, oh, look at that brand. I know that brand. I love that brand. But to get to that brand, to
Yeah.
get to the journey that creates that brand,
Yeah.
is a journey before the journey
Yeah.
that creates the person who might even think to create that brand.
Yeah.
And that's true of every brand, right?
Yeah.
That's true of every impactful and
Sure.
heart-centered brand that's trying to make a difference.
That's true.
So I love seeing that journey behind the journey,
Yeah.
because it's like, I actually joked on a previous episode, I was like, and the reason that you're on this podcast today is that I got into a car crash, right? And it wasn't that she hit me. It was just like the car crash happened, and then I met her. But similarly, it's like, you were drunk driving,
Yeah.
and then teff flour, right?
flour.
Like, you couldn't have gotten to the teff
No.
flour without the drunk driving.
Yeah.
They were essential components in the recipe.
Yeah.
And yet no one ever has a bad night of drinking and thinks, this is going to lead me to develop a perfect gluten-free bread recipe. I just know it.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
No one's ever had that thought.
Yeah.
But looking back, we can see how these personal journeys get
Absolutely.
us to where we're going.
Yeah.
And I love that, because it's so much easier for me to have gratitude for
Mhm.
my own hardship
Yeah.
when I frame it through this lens. I'm like really grateful that somebody smashed into me while I was in a parked car, because it led me to meet some incredible people
Wow.
who I never would have met.
Yeah.
So like, thank goodness I got smashed into. What a blessing. Not how I felt in the moment.
Right.
So then what I know from reading about your company
Mhm.
is that eventually this recipe became very important to you and your family personally, not just for your family health practice, but
That's
for
right.
your own children. So can
Yeah.
you tell me a bit about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's the next chapter in the story. So yeah, my wife and I had our firstborn, and his name was Shiloh. And when he was about 2, she nursed long. So I think she nurses kids about 2 years, 2.5 years, something like that ballpark. And when he started introducing, like really kind of getting more onto solid foods, he developed eczema on his face, like really bad, and really bad like bowel movements. We were vegan and we'd been plant-based for several years before that, and we didn't know if it was something in our diet, what happened. And I didn't know. I knew my mom was really sensitive to gluten, but I didn't know that my grandma was actually celiac yet. And so she had digestive issues like a long time, like decades, until she finally figured it out, like in her 80s.
Wow.
Or 70s or something. Yeah. Anyways, so we figured, well, maybe it's gluten. And so we cut out gluten like completely. And we ate like Ezekiel bread. Like we were like super, healthy with the gluten element. But when we cut it out, it was like night and day. Yeah. Everything cleared up. And then it was just like, wow, okay, well, what do we do now? So I went out to the grocery store to find what there was. And it was like, people eat this? Like, this is horrible. It's like eggs and xanthan gum, which was originally developed for the fracking industry as a lubricant for oil drilling, and like all kinds of crazy stuff like in this product. And it was like 4 different types of starches and no protein, and like carb to fiber ratio is like 40-1 or some silly thing, like crazy. Like, I'm not putting this in my kid's body. So I'm like, nope. So my wife actually started innovating first, and she made like she found this cool cookbook, and there's these flatbreads that were baked on a cast iron pan in the oven. And like, it was not bread, but it was edible.
Yeah.
And so we just kind of ate. That was good, to be honest, but it wasn't like, sliced bread. And so we ate that for a while. And then I ended up meeting through a series of circumstances. My wife's father died, and we were passing through the country, and God made circumstance just amazing. But do you know who Barbara O'Neill is?
The name sounds familiar.
She's a health lecturer. Just search her. She's got 300,000 followers on Instagram and whatever. But anyways, we had come across some of her lectures on DVD, and my wife was trying to get some more, and there was a number on the back of the DVD, and so we ended up calling it. So her daughter lives in Wisconsin. So, instead of shipping them to us, we were literally passing right by her house. She's like, just stop by and come get them. We stopped there to pick up the DVDs and just stay the night with her. She was super friendly. And this huge storm comes in, and we get trapped at her house. Like, the highways closed, like Midwest storm, like massive
Wisconsin style snow.
Wisconsin style snow. So we get stuck there for several days. And in the meantime, I'd done construction to kind of pay the bills. I'd done construction for many years before this. So I did the health work, but construction to pay the bills. And so I knew a lot about, finish work and stuff. And her banister is all loose, and I'm like, I can fix that for you. So I'm like, using her husband's tools to like fix her whole house for the couple of days I'm there. And he's like, hey, would you like come back and re-roof our house for us? I'm like, sure, I can do that, no problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll do that. Let's do it. I was working on a construction job in Minot, North Dakota at the time. So I was about finished with that. And I said, in the summer, I'll be done, and I can come back around. So I ended up doing that. And we were in the process of trying to figure out this whole bread thing. And she is super into sourdough bread. And so Barbara O'Neill, her mother, has this culture that comes from her neighbor who's German, and whose grandmother brought it from Germany, and it's been a family heirloom since like the time of Kaiser Wilhelm in the late 1800s.
Yeah.
Like crazy, right? And it probably comes from like a German strain, a Russian strain.
Yeah.
Into Germany.
So it loves buckwheat.
Loves buckwheat. Yeah, totally. So anyways, that's our mother.
Wow.
We call her Wilma.
Wow.
Because Wilhelm.
Yeah, of course.
And so so we started working with her, and kind of another long story short, my wife's sister came and visited us while we were there. I was re-roofing the house, and Emma, Barbara's daughter's on the phone with her mom, and her mom's like, can't find good help down here in Australia. And she's like, you should see these girls, they're amazing. And because my wife's sister was there helping with the kids and with all the stuff in the house. Anyways, So my wife's sister's like, Raphael, she's like, I'll go to Australia. And so they pay her way and she goes to Australia while I'm finishing this house. She's there for like it took me like 2 months, 3 months. I ended up recladding their entire house, redoing all their windows, like the whole thing by myself. Anyways, and so she's there in Australia. So this is all germane, I promise. And so while she's there, she's staying with these people who are gluten intolerant, but they're into the sourdough thing, and that's where the whole sourdough gluten-free thing came from originally, for me, anyways. And so she comes back with this like really broad idea, like, oh yeah, there's no recipe, kind of like you said.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes it's this way, sometimes it's that
Pinch
way.
of this, pinch of that.
Pinch of that. And there's buckwheat, and there's quinoa, and there's this and that, and then and so I was like, well, this is really interesting. So they started, my wife and her and Emma actually start baking this bread, and it's all falling in, and it's not working good, but it tastes amazing. And like one time it was like, and it like worked, and I'm like, okay, from my chemistry mind, if it works once, it can work always. And we just got to find the variables. So we took that rough concept, and when I finished Emma's house, moved back to Oregon actually at that time, and I started tinkering. I'm like, I know we can figure this out. So I just started. I'm crazy with numbers and like the whole thing. So I built this like matrix spreadsheet and analyzed every grain's properties. It's how hydrophilic it was before bake, after bake, in the baking process, how much water it absorbs, its stretch, and I built these like kind of subjective, but I objectified them with numbers as much as I could. Like, so I just started tinkering and toying with the different grains and realizing that they had very different properties, each one of them. And if I blended them and I'd use this like spreadsheet to really kind of understand what I was looking for in stretch and in sheen and the crust and the darkness of the crust when it bakes and the paleness, and then of course cost, because I realized that I could make a loaf really, really, really good, but really, really, really
For
expensive.
$20 a loaf.
$20 a loaf. Yeah, like no one's gonna buy this.
Yeah.
So I had an aha moment once I built that matrix, and it just like all of a sudden stuff started working, and I was like, sweet. So then I was baking for the family. Everybody's loving it, and then my stepdad's like, I've got a lot of patients, and they don't have any options. Like there's nothing else on the market, and they would love to have this. So I was like, okay, cool. I'll bake some. I took these like Pyrex dishes. I had no baking dishes, so I just like put it in whatever I could fit in the oven, right? And I just started stuffing dough in these things, and I had these round Pyrex dishes, these little 1 quart round ones, and that's where the original round loaf came from.
Wow.
Like literally, that's the shape of our bread.
Yeah.
And so I baked it there, and I baked some in regular bread things and whatever, and I would like weigh it and then determine the price based on the weight, and I would take it into his practice, and his patients started going nuts. They're like, this is incredible. Like it's so good. And I could only bake so much, and it was just this little practice was overwhelming what I could do in my home kitchen. And they would like drive an hour, not even having an appointment, because they know I was bringing bread in.
Wow.
So I was like, man, I really got something here. This is something special.
So you just took a leap. I mean, ultimately, it was just like, this bread is delicious. People like it. They're clamoring for it. And we're going to just jump.
I'm kind of nuts like that.
I like that.
My poor wife.
It sounds like she's into it. It sounds like she's down to ride. She's like, oh, go re-roof someone's house for months at a time? Absolutely. Why not? I'll learn to bake while you're roofing. It'll be great.
We're both, good at dancing with the punches.
Yep. I think I can definitely relate. I've done a lot of jumping and hoping for the best later. Sometimes you have to, especially as you said, when it's new and different and you're trying to be the first to market. You can't really wait and see if it's going to be acceptable. You have to just trust that it's good, and you got to move with it.
Yeah.
So now here you are, fast forwarding a little bit. You're running a business. And I want to sort of like straddle this topic of small business and then public health, because I think that we don't often consider how they connect. But every small business, like every person like yourself who takes a risk, puts their own money and time and ego on the line to get a healthier product to market
Yeah,
is contributing to the overall shift
absolutely.
of the market.
Absolutely.
And there's this sort of like dance between supply and demand where you have to find that sweet spot because with a thing like nutrient-dense gluten-free sourdough, of
Yeah.
course you'll have a few consumers who truly need it, right?
Yeah.
The ones who are like sick and yearning and haven't had bread in a very long time.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of consumers that you have to educate along the
Really?
way. I mean, I've experienced this in many products that I've sold where I'm selling a product that maybe you've never heard of. And I'm not only selling it to you, I'm teaching you what it is. So for every company that makes it to the Whole Foods shelves, and Whole Foods is a great example because they tend to pick up these forward-thinking brands,
Yeah.
there's a big amount of education,
Yes.
huge amount of risk-taking, and all in the name of making the market a healthier place to make choices
Yeah.
because the consumer can only choose from the options.
Yes.
And even if every single doctor on this great country's surface had a nutrition background, and they don't.
No.
But even if they did, if they were to turn to their patients today and say, you should go buy something healthier, those patients go to the store and the options aren't there.
Yeah.
So
Really, they aren't.
the sort of changes that have to occur to public health rely on small business owners
They do.
taking huge risks.
Yeah.
So I want to sort of dive into that because here we are, big public health topic, making the marketplace more nutrient dense. And then zooming in to the small business side of that.
Yeah.
What is it like being a small business owner who's kind of paving the way for these big picture changes that need to happen at a societal level?
Scary.
Yeah.
It's really, really scary.
Yeah.
Like every day. And we've had several times where, we didn't know if we were going to make it. Several times. There's been a force behind what we're doing. And, our first shareholders were people I had helped at that health retreat. Had come in and really helped them battle their own, health challenges. And they were wealthy. And so they saw the beauty and the benefit in what we were wanting to do, and they also saw that I was not spineless. They put their neck out there too, because behind every small business, somebody's putting capital up,
Right.
a lot of capital, and taking big risks. And so that's, it's not always easy to find that person who's willing to take that risk. And I've been really blessed on that regard. Really, really, really awesome people that I've got on my board and in my shareholders. One of my shareholders is the prior CEO of Office Depot.
Oh, amazing.
Who's super into the health and wellness side of things as well. He founded a farm. He calls it Reverence Farms, and they do all like organic beef and organic dairy and
Amazing.
that kind of thing too. But it's something to have a prior Fortune 500 CEO as a friend.
Yeah.
He's a really wise guy, and he's helped me a lot, like just full of wisdom. I don't mean that in the wise guy sense.
He's a real wise
he's
guy.
a real wise guy.
No, but it is, especially when you're trying to grow.
Yeah.
And something that I'm also very curious about is, so there's this new phrase that's getting a lot of buzz. I say it a lot. Food is medicine. Food is medicine. And of course, looking back, that was not an uncommon thing to understand.
Yeah.
That, if you're sick, your grandmother is going to make you the traditional family soup and the tea and the herbs. And that's folk wisdom. And grandmas have been doing it for millennia.
Yeah.
And maybe some grandpas too. But, it was mostly grandma.
It's true.
So food is medicine.
Yeah.
And in this country, we spend more on medicine than any other country in the world.
Yeah.
And for that price tag, we get the worst health outcomes.
We do.
On the flip side, we spend so little on food. The percent of our incomes that people are routinely spending on food is some of the lowest ever seen in history.
Wow.
Even with inflation. So there's something missing economically from the understanding
Right.
of food as medicine, because we're so willing as a nation to spend this money on healthcare, but we still are struggling to understand how to spend it on food. Now, I know as a gluten-free organic consumer, I'm spending so much money on food, but I spend almost no money on healthcare.
Right.
So I'm interested, again, through the small business owner lens, but selling a product that is sort of medicinal in nature,
Yeah.
right? It's not just gluten-free. It's not just, oh, this doesn't have these allergens.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we are choosing the most nutrient-dense grains, the most nutritious, the most fiber-filled, protein-filled, low glycemic,
Yes.
all of these things that are functional foods.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you have to make it hit a price point
Mm.
that consumers will still reach for on
Yeah.
the shelf.
And that's challenging.
That's
Really
a challenge.
Really
So
challenging.
how do you find that balance? And is there a level of education that you have to do to get the consumer to understand what makes your product worth that price point?
Yeah, I'd say like probably the number 2 biggest, kind of like trolling slap in the face that we get on our ads and on all of our Instagram stuff is like, I ain't paying $9 a loaf for, this crap, It's like, yeah, that's so insulting. Like
Yeah.
we try so hard to keep that price as low as possible, and it is just challenging. And we've struggled as a company to try to keep that price down and stay competitive and be able to continue to exist.
Yeah.
And the education piece is really challenging. And we founded Simple Truths is our blog on our website, and we try to do a lot of educating through that blog. We write my director of brand development, Sandy Workman, is really awesome. She's full on. She's really like behind our vision, and she writes a lot of the content on there, and just really, really great stuff. Does research and kind of shows the benefit in eating whole ancient grains, sourdough, the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I encourage people to go check that blog out on our website.
Yeah, we will link to it below.
Awesome. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I really, people say a lot that if you want to be a better patron, you should work in the service industry, right? Because until you've worked as a server, you'll never really understand how hard it is to be a server. And I would say the same is true for grocery. Like if you've never worked in wholesale grocery, then you don't understand as a consumer all the moving parts. So
True.
as someone who's been director of sales
Yeah.
for a natural food small company just trying to pay the bills
Yep.
and take on more investing capital just to stay afloat.
Yep.
Yeah, like Whole Foods will call and say, do you want to run a sale next month? And if you say yes, that means you're choosing to make less money that
right.
month for the sake of maybe moving more units, getting more exposure. It can, of course, be worth it, but it's not. I think the consumer does see it as the grocery store's generosity. Oh, we're putting it on sale. We
Nope.
had a lot in stock, so we're willing to get. No,
it doesn't work that
the
way.
grocery store is going to get their part just as they always do. And bless their hearts, grocery is a small margin business as
it
well.
is.
So no one is exactly raking it in
No.
this entire scenario.
No.
But the consumer, if they haven't worked in grocery, if they haven't worked in consumer packaged goods, they don't really understand all the pieces behind it. And again, like here we are in this consumer marketplace that is driving the health of the nation. People are sick chronically.
Yeah.
We know that the majority of illnesses right now are diet-related disease, whether or not they also involve environmental contaminations, stress levels, social media, all of the above.
Sure.
Diet is fundamental.
Absolutely.
It's very much the foundation. And yet you go into the grocery store and it's just a free-for-all of crap. And then there's a little shelf, to put it very gently, a free-for-all of crap, just a buffet of junk. And then there's these little corners of healthy products, and they cost twice what the consumer is used to spending. But the consumer is very accustomed to spending a lot of money on doctor's visits, healthcare, but they're not necessarily making that connection.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is probably in the next 5 years, the biggest thing that needs to change is not just saying food is medicine, but really communicating with consumers who are both consumers of healthcare and groceries. What it means to shift a little bit of your spending towards your diet so you can shift a lot of your spending away from healthcare.
But it's challenging because you're fighting against very big industry.
Yeah.
Right. The medical industry is an industry, and but just looking at the big three, heart disease, diabetes, and cancer, are so impacted, especially the first two, by diet.
Yeah.
Like they're so driven by diet, and especially white processed carbohydrates.
Right. Number one thing.
And then one thing I really kind of hammer on is like there's all these like fad diets. I think they're fads, where you're jumping into like extremes. I don't like extreme diets we're, keto, we're just going to focus on fat, or, we're Atkins, we're going to focus on meat, we're going to, or whatever they are, right? I really think that nature has a lot to offer, and we need to have diversity in our diet as things in nature do. Deers don't eat in the same place all the time. They don't eat the same leaves. They don't eat the same grass. And so we should look for diversity in our diets and balance, especially.
Yeah.
And so when we get like this, carbs are bad, we should cut them out. Like no macronutrients are bad. They're all good, but any macronutrient can become harmful if it's tampered with in a lab.
Right. And consumed in gross excess.
Yeah. Or in gross excess, yes. So, but, especially carbohydrates, if you fractionate the grains and you buff off the fiber and you make a white flour, whether it's potato starch or white flour with wheat flour, or xanthan or tapioca or any of those things, you're putting a load on your system that's not natural.
Right.
And so it costs you. It costs your health.
Yeah.
And it's not just neutral. Like some people think that, well, if I don't eat super nutritious foods, eating white foods or things that are fluffy and light and white,
depleted, stripped.
It's just like, it's a neutral.
Yeah.
It's not a neutral.
Yeah.
It's actually a net loss.
Yeah.
And that's something that people really, I think, need to be educated on.
Yeah.
But how do you get the word out?
Yeah, I'm working on it. I mean, day in and day out. My very first episode of this podcast, I actually read and critiqued a report from the American Academy of Pediatrics on pediatric obesity.
Wow.
Long report. Very interesting. Pediatric obesity is an epidemic right now in America. And they went out of their way not to mention food in that report. It was like there was literally one sentence that was like, and of course, diet is playing a role. Obesity. I mean, the ultimate diet-related disease. It doesn't get more diet-related disease than obesity, right? That's what it is diet-related. And yet they were just tripping over themselves not to address food, because it's not just the healthcare industry. It's the food industry that are these two besties, power players, feeding off each other. And I think there's a way that they could feed off each other in a healthful way. I think that we could shift the entire narrative to have medically tailored meals, to have pharmaceutical companies putting out targeted microbiome products, right? There are bacteria missing from the guts of most Americans.
Sure.
Those might need to be synthesized in a lab at a certain point, because if they've gone extinct in the food supply and in the soil, you might need scientists to grow them for us. I'm open to that, But as you say, diversity is key, and nature can show us and teach us so much.
Yeah.
And our best bet for having a nutrient-dense diet is to eat a variety of things.
Yes.
And so the homogenized food system is really just going in the wrong direction in every possible way. But when we have something like a report from the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is like a trusted source for health information for millions of parents all over the country, when they're talking about pediatric obesity, and the first thing they're saying is, there are some drugs coming out now, and of course you can treat obesity with these drugs, but you'll have to be on them for life because obesity is a lifelong illness. And they aren't talking about diet. To me, it's like I woke up in Bananaville. Like something has gone terribly wrong with just the way that we're talking about the basics. And I say this as someone who was obese when she was a kid.
Wow.
And for whom I did not need a drug.
Yeah.
And for whom it is not a lifelong illness. Like, I'm not here waging a war against obesity. Like, my body just found its actual set point.
Right.
There was something very wrong.
Yes.
It needed to be fixed in a holistic, diversifying way, not by telling me that I was broken and required an injectable drug for the rest of my life.
Yes.
That would not have solved my problem. The food system is what needs to change.
Yeah.
And just the mindset. So I feel like, I'm very inspired by what you're doing because I love to feed people. And I've run a lot of small food businesses, but taking the leap to being a producer and to being an owner is scary, like you said, because you're entering a market that is inherently hostile towards your product in many ways, except for those who really need it and understand the value. And I'm sure. I would love to hear, actually, if you have any stories of people who reach out
Oh, lots of them.
because your bread, like, changed their child's life. Because I've been that mom,
So
right,
many.
who has a food allergy kid who finds a product and is, like, literally in tears because
Yeah.
now my kid can have a sandwich.
Yeah.
Do you have any that jump out to you?
Yeah, definitely. We've got, tens of thousands of reviews, 5-star reviews, and people leave those kind of comments to us all the time. Like, you brought bread back into my life. Like, you don't understand how important this is and how meaningful this is. And my kids love it. And that's so hard to find. And so there's definitely, it's definitely striking a note with people. And it's sticky too. Our customers are pretty sticky. Like, once they find us, they really get behind us, I've found. Yeah. So in our efforts to kind of educate our customers, I've done a lot of research around carbohydrates, because obviously our bread is not keto, it's not carbohydrate-less, and they've got these wheat fiber. Have you seen those?
Oh my
Like
God, the low
the
carb
low
wheat
carb,
fiber
net zero
wraps.
carbs, all this
Ugh,
stuff.
yeah.
So, okay, like everybody's so fixated on that carbs are evil. But also in one group of people, maybe you might say like the health, there's a large branch of the people pursuing better health that are just cutting carbs out, thinking they're evil altogether. And then on the other side of the other ditch on the road is people who don't even understand the impact of carbs in their life. And both, I think, are really throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Because carbs are not bad for us unless they're fractionated, unless they're processed and white and empty carbohydrates, right?
Right.
Or how did you say that earlier?
Yeah, like fully refined
Refined,
and
that's the word I'm
stripped.
looking
And then,
for,
of
yeah.
course, bleached and bromated. I mean, you can really
Yes.
do a number on carbs.
Correct. Yeah. So you can take it down to like the most basic, just carbohydrate, and it becomes harmful. So the studies I looked at, it showed that, just for example, like pure carbohydrate, which is just high fructose corn syrup. Somebody who drinks 2 20-ounce high fructose corn syrup, sodas a week, just 2 a week, increases their chance of heart disease and diabetes by over 20%. Just by those 2.
Yeah.
And people drink them chronically.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, another study I saw shows that eating a diet that's full of whole grains, so carbs, but
Right.
carbs in their whole state, reduces heart disease and diabetes by 20%.
Right.
So it has a complete opposite effect. And so carbs are good for us, in my opinion, but only if they're whole and untampered with as much as possible.
2 things I want to add to that. The first is fructose specifically.
Yeah, that's right.
And I am someone who actually kind of had this stumbling block in my nutrition understanding, because if you get into being paleo, you will find yourself in a place where all grains are bad, but fruit is fine. And then you have a lot of people that go like paleo plus white rice, right? Because there's no phytic acid. It's just carbs to fuel. I mean, honestly, like your CrossFit workout, right? If you're a CrossFitter paleo, you burn out pretty quick.
Yeah.
You need to bring carbs back in, right?
Carbs.
But what happens is you start thinking all grains are bad and all legumes are bad,
Yeah,
but
wow.
fruit is totally fine. And you can really do a number on yourself with
Damage.
fruit. I mean, grapes, bananas, I like them. I eat them. My kids
Sure.
eat them. But those aren't exactly the way that they were designed by nature.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Oh,
saying?
we've tampered 'em.
They've come quite a long
Yeah,
way
a
on
long
their
ways.
journey. And it's not stripped. It's not bleached. But it is genetically altered through
Hybridization.
mutagenesis. There are a lot of ways
Sure.
to change a plant.
Mm-hmm.
So fructose specifically, the way that it's metabolized in the liver causes all kinds of metabolic dysfunction.
Yeah.
And research from Dr. Robert Lustig's lab, and he is a big believer in like carbs aren't bad. It's the refined carbs and specifically fructose.
Yep.
They took children who had non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, high triglycerides, and I think pre-diabetes. I don't believe they were fully diabetic. And they changed their diet for 2 weeks. All they did was remove refined sugar. They kept in whole grains and they had some fresh fruit They just took out, cane sugar, corn syrup, anything that was a concentrated, refined carbohydrate source. But they kept their diets isocaloric so that no one could attribute the benefits to calorie deficit.
Yep.
2 weeks, these kids, triglycerides normalized.
Wow.
Fat was leaving their liver.
Absolutely.
They were no longer pre-diabetic.
Yep.
They were eating starch, carbohydrates every single day. They just weren't having refined carbohydrates and sugar.
Wow.
So even that switch,
huge,
in 2 weeks,
huge,
was reversing fatty liver in children.
But let me tell you something. It is not easy to get someone to give that up.
Yeah.
Sugar is a drug.
Yes.
It's a white crystalline acid drug.
Yeah.
And the brain treats it just like a drug. When you eat it, it gives you dopamine, and it gives you good feelings, and it tastes amazing. And people aren't used to what nature actually tastes like.
Right.
And that's something, another part of the educational process is, eating sourdough, ancient whole grains. By the way, the sourdough process further breaks down those carbohydrates into even lower glycemic and makes it also predigests them so that they're easier. The starches that are in the grains are easier to digest through the microbiome of the sourdoughs.
Yeah.
So getting people off of that drug into something that it does not taste like white bread.
Right.
You're not going to buy Simple Needs and think, oh, Wonder Bread.
Yeah.
It's not the same. And so there is an element of you need, as a consumer, you need to decide this is good for me.
Right.
And taste buds, you're going to adjust.
Yeah.
There's an element of that.
And they will.
But I want to also say that it is delicious.
Yeah.
It actually is good, but it's not hyper good.
Right.
Like to say.
It's not a drug.
It's not a drug.
It is a delicious food.
It's a delicious food.
And it is not a drug.
Yeah.
I love that you said this because I was driving to meet a friend a few weeks ago and I passed a gas station that had a sign that was like, we are a gas station that has real food. Like they sell fruits and vegetables at the corner store. And I thought, that's so great. No one is buying those there. Like if you go into a gas station for a candy bar and you see a banana, you're not like, thank God there's a banana here. You came in for your fix. You came in for the Snickers. Like you're jonesing. You're not there for the banana.
Right.
Now, there's probably some families for whom it's an access point and that's wonderful. But the average consumer who walks into the corner store for cigarettes and a candy bar is not grabbing a banana. And I've seen the piles of overripe bananas. Yeah. And I don't think they're being composted. That's a side topic. But I thought in that moment, why don't we have rehab for processed food? We understand,
Anonymous.
We understand that if someone's been smoking meth or even just drinking alcohol often and a lot, that they can't just make the change on their own. Yeah. And yet you go to the doctor and you're like, Doc, I'm overweight. I don't feel well. And he's like, well, change your diet, idiot. Well, how? Yeah. Do you have the support for me? Because I'm purchasing things based on my income, based on my palate, based on the commercials that I'm inundated with 24 hours a day on the highway when I'm driving to work, at the TV when I'm relaxing after work. It's nonstop. You want me to just change it? You would never just say to an alcoholic, hey, man, like just stop drinking. You got this.
Stop drinking and keep hanging around drunks.
Exactly. Hang out with drunk people, stop drinking, and just watch nonstop advertisements for how beautiful and fun drinking will make you. That'll be easy. Yeah. We understand. I mean, even just Whole30 does a bit of this, like, just so you know, for the first couple days, you may get like the Whole30 flu. You may feel sick. Yeah. You may get headaches.
Your body's dumping.
But we're not telling the average consumer that, hey, by the way, like when you first switch your food to healthy, you might feel worse for like, I don't know, maybe as much as a week because you're detoxing from a drug.
Yeah.
You are coming off of a drug.
It's crazy.
We're not really giving consumers that knowledge to support them. And even if they have the knowledge, it's like, can they take off from work for a week while they have the carb flu? Who can afford that? Who has that option?
Another thing I've found is people, nobody thinks they eat unhealthy.
Right.
Nobody thinks they eat unhealthy.
Yeah.
Which is baffling to me because obviously there's a problem in the way we're eating as a nation.
Right.
Or we wouldn't have the problem in the diseases that we do statistically.
Right.
So there's a need of like people understanding that there's a need.
Right. Yes, exactly. So one thing that you and I touched on a little bit earlier is that the market needs to shift. But the market is starting to shift.
Yes.
And I know, actually, I say this kind of like tongue in cheek a lot as a allergy mom, as a gluten-free health consumer. If I'm traveling cross country, if I'm visiting my relatives in Illinois and Ohio,
Hmm.
I shop at Walmart
Yeah.
because the local market is not going to have what I need, but Walmart will always have kombucha
Yep.
and something gluten-free
Yep.
and a whole section of organic fruits and vegetables
That's
because
true.
they can afford to throw them away if nobody buys them,
Yep.
where the local mom and pop shop can't afford to toss that much product if they
Sadly.
haven't done the market education in that region.
Yeah.
So there is actually this like interesting double-edged sword or
Yeah.
opportunity where as small companies we're looking towards these big retailers to
Hmm.
help drive these market changes. So
Yes.
as a seller, what are you seeing on that side?
Absolutely. The doors are opening. It's amazing. We got a personal invitation to Walmart's open call last year,
Wow.
and we were there. It was cool. Dwayne Johnson addressed us, and open call is basically Walmart's attempt to uh, bring in U.S. based new products. And so we got an invitation. It turns out the woman who was in charge of orchestrating all the whole event is a customer online and loves our
Aw.
product. So she's really excited and wants to see us get into Walmart. I'm going to meet with them in July. We'll see how it turns out, but they've shown a lot of interest. So that's interesting. And then Kroger, we actually have a win on that, and we'll be launching into 17 regions of Kroger this fall.
That's
So September,
awesome.
October timeframe, you'll start seeing us in the Kroger banners across the states.
I'll keep that in mind for
Yeah.
my Midwest trips because
Yeah.
there are Krogers everywhere I go.
Absolutely. So we're super excited about that. I mean, that's huge. And by the way, also with Kroger, similar situation. We were in the top 15 finalists in the Go Fresh, Go Local Summit. So
Ah.
that was 2 years ago. We didn't win, but we were in the top 15 out of like 2,000 or a lot of people, a lot of brands submitted. So they saw a value in this kind of product because they see the shift, and it's happening in consumers, all over the place. And so these big companies are going to shift as they see the demand coming from the people.
Right.
So,
And do you think that companies like, I don't know if I should name drop, but some of the competitors in the gluten-free bread space,
yeah.
do you think that they will begin to see the writing on the wall in terms of nutrient density? Because even the companies that really rushed to, and I'm grateful for them, to create alternative products, these days, if you go gluten-free, if you're like, I think my health problems are gluten-related.
Mm-hmm.
Back when I first went gluten-free, you had to choose a whole food diet if you
Yeah.
went gluten-free. These days, you could go gluten-free and your diet could still be Coke, Oreos, and white bread,
Yeah.
which is not going to make you feel better.
No.
You might feel less symptomatic of celiac, but all the nutrient deficiencies that you developed during that celiac presentation are not going to resolve themselves on a diet of hyper-refined gluten-free carbohydrates.
Yeah.
So do you think that those big players in the gluten-free space will begin to put out more nutrient-dense products to meet that need, or do you think that they're just happy with what they're producing?
I think that they're trying to pivot that way. What I'd also like to caution people with is 100% whole grains doesn't mean what you think it means.
Mm-hmm.
It means all grains are whole. That's all it means.
Interesting.
And so 100% whole grains can be made 99% out of potato starch and put 1% teff, and they can market it 100% whole grains.
Mm-hmm.
Read your labels.
Yeah.
If there are not whole grains at the top of the list, there's not much in there. And
That
so
is so sneaky.
yeah, very sneaky. So they're unfortunately trying to capitalize on this push by using marketing tools like 100% whole grains to get people to buy their products, but still not being healthy. That's what
Right.
I'm seeing. And so there are a few players in the space that are coming up, and Simple Needs is, we're throwing our elbows and hoping to basically find ourselves on the shelves next to these fakes, to have some real options on the table.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I don't see a lot of other brands, especially not the big ones, making actual plays for actually healthy products.
Right. Well, that leaves that market share wide open for
Yeah,
Simple Needs
I believe
to
so.
fill that
Yeah,
need.
we see that opportunity.
Yeah, that's so amazing. So I guess in closing, I just want to ask, where should people look to learn more about you, they can order your product online. If they can't find it at their
hmm
local store, should they request it?
Definitely. We have a store locator on our website.
Oh, great.
So they can go on our website, simpleneeds.com, and the store locator, I think it's at the bottom somewhere, and they can just do /store locator also. But it'll look at their geographic location and tell them where they can find us in stores near them. We try to keep that updated and accurate, but find a store near you. Once we launch into Kroger, we're gonna be fairly well distributed. We're in all the Sprouts nationwide.
Oh, awesome.
We're in the Whole Foods up the East Coast, as far north as New York, and we're hoping to expand that also in the next couple of years. So hopefully we can just be near them.
Yeah.
And they can find us there because the most impactful thing to a brand when we first launch, especially, is moving product off the shelves.
Right.
So that's the hardest thing to do also, is getting people to know you're there.
Yeah, the first order is the easy part. It's
Yeah.
the second and third orders that really kill you.
Yeah.
Well, Tristaun, I am so grateful that you joined me today in conversation, and I very much look forward to following your journey and your bread's journey up and down the East Coast and all around the country. And I do hope that our listeners will look for the product, find it, try it. And I know that for me, like, sourdough is second nature, that tart,
Yeah.
tangy flavor. When I first tried your product, it was the first true sourdough I had tasted since going gluten-free.
Wow.
It was such a thrill. There was a lot of phony sourdoughs, maybe
Yeah.
a
Put
little
vinegar in
hint
there.
of
Yeah.
sour. Exactly. Not the real deal.
Mhm.
But I could tell from yours that it was the real deal. So anyone out there who's been gluten-free and is craving sourdough and isn't standing in my kitchen eating my sourdough should definitely find what you are putting out there, because
And
it's the real deal.
I'd just like to say also, to close, like,
Yeah.
it has been so powerful hearing people's testimonies coming in, of mothers who say, we haven't been able to find anything. We have one family that just came to mind that their son is celiac. The son is celiac. The wife is the woman is she had some other food sensitivities, and the husband had food sensitivities, and Simple Needs basically fit all of their needs, pun intended. And so, they left us a really awesome and gave us their picture, and we actually use it in some of our marketing material. But there's so many people like that
Yeah.
when they find that solution, it's so special to them. And that's what really gets me up in the morning, honestly, and makes me keep pushing forward and enduring the difficulties of making a small business in the consumer packaged goods space, making the hardest product probably in the world to make at scale.
Yes.
So,
Well, thank you so much for doing that incredibly hard work. Millions of consumers around the country are benefiting, and I'm sure they are all very grateful for the work that you're doing.
awesome. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you once again for listening to the Marian Flaxman Network Podcast, a podcast dedicated to reintroducing personal narratives into critical public health topics. For more information on me, Marian, please visit my website at marianflaxman.com. For more information on my guest, Tristaun LeClaire, or for more information on any of the incredible topics that we covered today, including his bread company and their blog, please find the many links in the show notes. This episode was produced by Brain Trust Productions and sponsored by Informed Solutions Consulting. Thank you so much once again for listening, and we will see you next time.